Welcome to the Software People Stories. I'm Shiv.
I'm Chitra.
And I'm Gayatri.
We bring you interesting, untold stories of people
Associated with the creation
Or consumption of software-based solutions.
You'll hear stories of what worked,
and sometimes what didn't,
you will also hear very personal experiences.
and insights that would trigger your thoughts
And inspire you to do even greater things.
Before we jump into today's conversation, a special thanks to PM Power Consulting for encouraging and supporting this show right from the start. With over 1,000 person-years of collective experience, PM Power has helped many organizations, teams, and individuals chart out their own journeys of excellence and make progress. Thank you, PM Power. Now, let's move to today's episode. In this episode of the Software People Stories, I am in conversation with Yaron Schneider, co-founder of Diagrid and a seasoned developer and entrepreneur deeply involved in the open source movement. Yaron shares his origin story, starting from programming at age 11 to his current role as co-founder of Diagrid. He discusses his early foray into university education, experience in the military, and his progression within the software industry, including a notable tenure at Microsoft. Yaron delves into the joys and pains of working in open source, detailing the challenges and rewards of maintaining a project with thousands of contributors and balancing corporate and community needs. The discussion also touches upon the complexities of scaling in hybrid environments, the risks associated with supply chain attacks, and the evolving role of developers in the age of AI and low-code solutions. Yaron concludes by offering advice for those aspiring to contribute to open source and sharing personal strategies for managing the stresses of a startup life. Listen on. Hi, Yaron. Welcome to the Software People Stories.
Thank you so much for having me.
Yeah. Whenever I talk to somebody who's been associated with the open source movement, I'm completely awed. The kind of things that you guys have been doing. And then when I saw your profile, I think there's a lot that we can get into. But before that, if you can briefly share your origin story, how you got associated with software, and what has been your career trajectory, we'll take it from there.
Oh, yeah, for sure. Happy to. So I got acquainted with computers pretty early on. I started programming at the age of 11. It was BASIC at the time, and then Turbo Pascal, and actually started my university degree at the age of 13. So earlier than most people do, and I was like in mid school then. I was just going into 10th grade, I think it was. So yeah, starting the university degree then was definitely challenging, but this is really where I fell in love with computers because, computer science. Yeah, and so then I went on to do computers during my military service, which I've done for 3 years, and then I started working for various software companies as a junior engineer, then a senior engineer, then went on to become software architect, and then a CTO for a bunch of really interesting startups. And one of them IPO'd for like $11 billion a few years ago, which makes me, kind of like a little bit maybe regret the fact I didn't stay. But not really because it took me down a very different path in my life where I basically left that place and then I got to work at Microsoft. Basically, when I left that startup, and at Microsoft, I led the engineering for open source projects, which I created that became really successful in the CNCF ecosystem. And then my co-founder of Diagrid, which is my company, and we saw the need for developers to basically find their way in a world full of infrastructure technologies where not many developer-focused tools are. And so we've created a developer-focused project called Dapper. Dapper really took off, and then we wanted to forge our own path. And so we started Diagrid, the company. And today we're working with many large companies, governments worldwide on this open source adoption.
So we'll start with the joys and pains of working in open source.
Yeah, there's as many pains as there are joys for sure. So let's start with the easy, right? Let's start with the joys. The joys are if your project is adopted by many great people, then you see kind of like this community spring from nothing. And this ability to start a community from scratch, from nothing basically, is, in my opinion, one of the most satisfying things I've ever encountered during my career. And that was like insane, to be able to see Dapper being adopted so rapidly and find its ways into thousands of companies within less than, 2 years of when it hit the market. That was incredible. And getting 8,000 Discord members today, which is where our community is at, talking to these people, hear about how they adopt the project, talk to so many people from all over the world, from many diverse backgrounds. This is absolutely great. And like I cherish, and I'm thankful for every moment of it. It brings a lot of satisfaction. And I've been working with this community for 5 years now, ever since we released it. Actually, it's more like Dapper's actually hit 7 years. Wow, it's
Oh,
it's
wow.
grown a lot. Yeah. And th this is definitely the best part of the job, seeing people use your project, telling you how much they love it, telling you they appreciate you for creating it. That's all good stuff. Like it makes you go to sleep at night with a smile on your face because you feel like you put something out there that is greater than yourself, that many people use and find it useful, and you're helping companies from healthcare to retail to security really make their end consumers' lives easier. So it's kind of like the epitome example of how you could do outreach for the greater good through open source, and I really love that. The not so nice things about open source is that it's very difficult because you do need to maintain a project based on the goodwill of like thousands of individual people, right? The Dapper, for example, it has 4,000, over 4,000 individual contributors.
Wow.
And yeah, needing to run a project that has so many individual contributors, but then also big companies like Microsoft and Adobe and our company together, where sometimes people will have like different views or competing priorities. That is very, very difficult. And it can become pretty stressful, actually.
Yeah. Uh, so that's really interesting. When we talk about programming in the small and programming in the large and all that, but open source seems to be really large. Having such a large community of contributors, and then how do you kind of coordinate or prioritize and pick things? Yeah.
Yeah, coordination is especially difficult because I'll just give you one example, and that example unfortunately repeats because you don't know all of your contributors, and that is you work on something, and then one day you'll wake up and you'll see like a commit being suggested to the project via pull request on GitHub that basically contradicts everything you did, or it's the exact same thing you're doing, and now you need to drop your work and coordinate with a person, and it's very, very disruptive.
Yeah, you said that now you've also played the role of an architect and now as a CTO. When you kind of have the big picture, the vision, and then get everybody to kind of align to that, how is that or these kind of roles different from, let's say, being a maintainer?
I would say it's very different
Uh-huh.
because when you're leading a co-founder or a CTO role, you have to think about your company and what's best for your company. And I've got 31 people, under me,
Okay.
basically working for Diagrid, under me and Mark, and we are responsible for their well-being. We're
Mhm.
responsible for their livelihood. We are responsible for our customers who are
Mm.
coming in from many verticals. And this carries a lot of responsibility, and we need to do things a certain way. So when you're CTO and co-founder, you look at the things you need to do to basically do right by your board, by your
Mhm.
stakeholders, by your employees, and by your customers. On the other hand, when you're a maintainer, your priorities are different. You basically need to do what's right by the community, and most of the time, those things overlap, which is great. Like most of the things we do for our community is good for our customers and for our employees and vice versa. But there are times when these things do not go hand in hand together, and then you have a tough choice to make. And this is a contrast that is, painful at times, but every open source project needs to have a commercial entity behind it, and sometimes you need to make tough choices. So sometimes I will do what's right for the community at the expense of, a certain customer because I feel like this is the right thing to do for the project long term, which will end up driving more, sales for my company in the end, and vice versa.
Yeah, so that raises another interesting question. You mentioned that when you joined Microsoft, also you started working on open source. So when uh, typically the open source movement has come from, call them the rebels or no, those who did not want to conform to corporate structures and so on one side, and being part of a corporate, how did that
Yeah.
play out?
Yeah, so I would argue today that, open source has been hijacked by corporatism and the big corporate world. If you're looking at a project like Kubernetes, the main drivers of engineering and innovation into the project are still the large three cloud providers, right? It's Google, who birthed Kubernetes, and it's Microsoft and it's Amazon, because they have core services running on this infrastructure. And the CNCF in general is a very commercial corporate based entity, which is good. I'm not saying this in a bad way. I actually think it's good because if it's done right, it's creating this virtuous cycle where companies are invested in open source because they in turn make money. And so they get to fund the projects and the projects give them money. And this cycle basically continues and you've got innovation that way. But yeah, the origins of open source were far less, commercial based and were a lot more, I would say, free oriented in their spirit and direction and in how they came to be.
Since you mentioned CNCF, now there is a lot of talk, or at least some talk in some circles, about getting back to on-prem.
Mhm.
But from an architecture perspective, do you see a cloud-based model but running on-prem, or is that also likely to change?
Yeah, I think for several years now, people have been on and off migrating to and from the cloud, and I think it's going to continue that way. You have like companies like Dropbox who, for example, moved off of AWS for the majority of their services, went on-prem, and they saved millions of dollars per year, right? Because for their specific architecture, it made sense to go and basically rent your own infrastructure or buy your own infrastructure on-prem and just maintain that. But we do see a lot of cloud native technology being deployed on-prem, right? Kubernetes has funded a lot of companies that have on-prem solutions for how to deploy Kubernetes. OpenShift from Red Hat is one really clear example that's used by lots of government entities and entities that need to run in their own data centers who cannot trust the public cloud. And Rancher or K3S and Rancher Labs and other example of that are abound. There's many open source projects that can run on-prem these days. And I think in the last few years, a lot of projects within the CNCF made sure that, yes, they can integrate with things like Azure, Google Cloud, and Amazon Web Services, but they also make the adjustments needed to go on-prem because they recognize the fact that many large organizations are going to be hybrid in nature.
Hmm. Yeah. So then I think that's a natural segue to scalability, which has been your area where you've been working on. So when you have a homogeneous environment, whether it is all open source or the known stacks that we work with, or if it is proprietary, it's fine. But when you are in a hybrid environment, and today I think almost every application has to either consume some service that is hosted in a hybrid environment, or the whole application is on a hybrid thing. So what are your thoughts on the impact of scaling in these, mainly from a manageability perspective? Because security is
Yeah.
another aspect. We can look at that. Yeah.
So I think it's a great question because when people think about, things as simple as auto scaling, they look at the cloud and they go like, oh, okay, I'm gonna scale in now, I'm gonna drop a VM and I'm not gonna pay for it. So if I'm running on-prem, why do I need that? And that is because it's actually much harder to add software or sorry, hardware when you're running on-prem. And so you want to make sure that you're as efficient as possible. So you have these large pools of compute and then you run your software on them. And to be as efficient as possible, you need to be able to scale in and scale out dynamically and make sure that you're only spending the amount of compute you need for every single point in time when you actually need it based on the traffic that you're seeing. So I think autoscaling is in particular important in on-premise environments because if you're just gonna autoscale all the time your software and never scale in or scale to zero, then you're just going to be paying up for more and more hardware. And at some point, you're just going to be stuck until the people come in with a truck and basically just put new VMs and physical hardware in your environment.
Maybe for the benefit of our listeners, if you can just share, what Diagrid or Dapper uh, aims to do.
Yeah. So Dapper is a toolbox for developers. For years, developers have been tasked with doing simple things that are looking simple on the surface, but are actually very complex, like discovering services, securing them, creating maps that basically detail how services talk to each other, writing to databases, doing event-driven architectures with pub/sub, and creating business transactions, workflows. Any type of application is really a workflow. But these are very hard distributed systems challenges, and developers really need to write a lot of infrastructure before they even get to a single line of business code. And in the end, it's that business code that actually matters to them and the organization. And so we've created Dapper to basically allow developers to focus on what's important and not focus on the infrastructure glue, meaning developers do not need to focus on how they interact with the database, with a pub sub-broker, with a secret store, how they create a long-running workflow. All of that Dapper basically takes care of. It has a very simple programming model, SDKs in all major languages, so very inclusive to all developers. And then a developer can come at it from any language and basically derive in a few lines of code what would otherwise would have taken them thousands of lines of code. So it makes shipping software a lot more agile and faster, while allowing developers to reduce the number of errors that they actually will have in their systems, because Dapper encapsulates all of the best practices within its code base.
And what about Diagrid?
Yeah, and Diagrid, we are a commercial entity behind Dapper. So we have a platform that is mostly focused on AI and workflow orchestration. With the rise of AI agents, you're seeing systems that are very, very autonomous, meaning you give them access to your entire digital infrastructure.
Yeah.
And AI agents are really only effective when you give them more autonomy. But the more autonomy you give them, the more can go wrong. So the very first thing that any form of company needs to guarantee when running agents is that they're reliable and that if the agent crashes, it picks up where it left off. Because if you have an agent that does 500 things in a workflow and it fails at thing 499, you really don't want to start all the way from one because you're going to be paying for all of those LLM costs right from the very beginning. And so our platform basically makes sure that all of your AI agents and workflows in general are reliable, and we have enterprise guarantees, meaning it's SOC 2 compliant, it's audited, it comes with full enterprise support, and it can be deployed on-prem as well as in the cloud.
Yeah, this kind of very at an abstract level sounds similar to what we used to talk about maybe a couple of decades ago on the OLTP systems and fail safe and two-phase commits and
Yeah.
rollbacks and roll forwards and all that. So have things got more complicated with so many technologies, so many pieces being there with microservices or these autonomous agents and so on? Or do you think there would be some conventions at least to have the orchestration somewhat compatible?
Yeah, and this is exactly what we're trying to actually solve with Dapper. So instead of a developer needing to now learn 10 or 20 different technologies and live in a very fragmented ecosystem, we want them to know the Dapper API, and Dapper behind the scenes can talk to any number of services. We have over 120 integrations with pretty much any technology you can think of. And so Dapper aims to reduce that complexity in the microservices environment. And yes, definitely with AI agents, complexity is going to grow, but it's also going to reduce at the same time. So it's going to grow because you're going to need to make those agents observable, secure, and reliable.
Mhm.
But this is what we aim to do with Dapper. Basically, give them all of those traits, no matter what AI agent you're actually running. At the same time, they're going to make things less complex because they will be the ones writing code and integrating with systems. So a lot of the things developers do today, they're not going to be doing probably in a few years because most of that is just going to be automated by AI systems.
Hmm. We also talk about this, supply chain injections,
Hmm.
right? With autonomous agents, and even if you have somebody who's going to govern the orchestration, are there ways to prevent any supply chain attacks?
Totally prevent, I would argue no.
Mhm.
I think there is no such thing as a completely secure infrastructure. There will
Mm,
always be challenges and there will always be risks and bad actors. Um, and even encrypted blobs, right, which is something that's considered secure, it's only as secure as the encryption mechanism of its era. But in like 5 years from now, in the post-quantum world, anything could breach anything that you're encrypting today. So regarding secure supply chain, yeah, I mean, you should cover your bases, make sure that your images have less CVEs, but
yeah.
that's pretty much all you can do. However, taking advantage of a technology like Dapper can go a long way. Why? Because instead of a developer needing to pull in 5 different SDKs into their code, and be exposed to potentially 5 different vulnerabilities in the
Mm,
upstream code base, now they're only talk to Dapper, and Dapper itself is auditing and making sure that it doesn't have CVEs. So by basically abstracting over these technologies with Dapper, they make 5 dependencies into one dependency.
mm. So when you talk about supporting so many SDKs or so many languages and so on, how hard is it, or probably how do you even visualize the variations that you would have, and as an architect, how do you build for something that's so diverse and
It's
keeps evolving?
it's very difficult. Because each one of these languages require a very different skill set.
Mm.
Java is extremely different from JavaScript, for example,
Yeah.
or Python is like the opposite of C Sharp. But Python's a bit like Go, and C Sharp is a bit like Java, and you have these very diverse programming ecosystems that are nothing like each other. And so when you do things, you first of all want to make sure you're consistent with your API surface, but then you also want to make sure that in the different SDKs, you're doing what's native to each language. And so when you do that, you suddenly introduce inconsistency. And so you have to balance these things out. For example, the want to have a consistency of APIs, but then needing to rename the methods in each
Mm.
SDK because the naming in Python, which uses snake case, is not the same one that C Sharp uses, is introducing a lot of complexity, and you always need to navigate through that.
Mm. So with so many changes happening, how do you ensure that your platform stays up to date?
So we are trying to make sure that we have open source maintainers covering each one of those SDKs,
Yeah.
and then it comes down to coordination, right? We need to coordinate all of the maintainers, and we have in our Dapper project something called proposals, where if anyone wants to make sure that something gets accepted at the project level, it needs to have a consensus vote from all of the maintainers of the project, including those of the SDK. So everyone becomes aware, everyone agrees on what they need to do, and so when a proposal finally gets accepted, everyone knows what it's going to mean for their respective SDK that they are maintaining. So it's really about driving consensus and making sure that things are clear to everyone.
Okay. Uh, so we spoke about the challenges of scaling, and when something like this is managed by, let's say, a system developed by someone else, uh, would the developer, or no, whoever is the publisher, probably that's a better term, of solution, feel the lack of visibility or control?
The feel the lack of visibility or control doing what?
For scaling, when you do that, earlier you used to kind of hand code or hand design how it will scale, the logic, and the
Hmm.
scaling up, scaling out, whatever things you have, building in resiliency, all that was actually built into another solution that we are building. Now, when some of these are consumed as services offered by someone
Hmm.
else, uh, would there be a sense of lack of visibility of what's happening, or lack of control, saying I can't go and then fiddle with the individual bits? And
Right. Well, Dapper is open source, so anyone can actually download the code, make changes to it, and build their own library.
Yeah,
And it's under the CNCF, which is the Linux Foundation, which means that the IP and trademarks are
yeah,
all within the
yeah,
CNCF. So the code is out there, the code is visible. Yeah, so anyone can make changes. When people go to buy software based on open source tech, then they can still understand what's happening in the managed service because most of its code base is based on open source. But of course, there's going to be stuff that's not visible. And so that's where you take a leap of faith to trust in the vendor.
yeah, yeah. Uh, so a related thing is now everybody at least wants to try their hand at vibe coding.
Yeah.
And with all these tools coming up, and some of them in a way become proprietary because they just develop code based on some inbuilt model that is there. But as an architect, when you want to design for uh, catering to a lot of either a variety of use cases or users or something more like a developer tool, you don't really know how it is going to be used. Any thoughts you have on whether the vibe coders will kind of pollute the environment?
They will for sure. I mean, they already are. My opinion about vibe coding is that for non-technical people, it's great because they can get their ideas across and create something very simple to just showcase it. And for small projects, you might be able to take it into production. Yeah, hell yeah. Vibe code and take it to prod, if that's okay. For like enterprise deployments, however, it's a different game. Because you need to have a very thorough understanding of what you do. Why? Not because of the first deployment, because of the bug you're going to be fixing next time. Because once you encounter bugs and you're letting the system fix the bugs for you, you don't really have a good way to know if you're introducing further bugs or what of the repercussions if you don't actually intimately know the code base. And this is where I think vibe coding breaks down because your level of knowledge about the code base is greatly reduced. And you have to basically trust something that doesn't really know how much it should care about different parts of the system. And so this is really where trust erodes and breaks down between those large language models and your business, basically. So vibe coding, yeah, great to skeleton things out and get things out there. I wouldn't like trust it completely to maintain systems long term today.
Probably moving a little bit away from what we've been talking so far is personally having been a hardcore technology person, how was it to become an entrepreneur when you had to
Um,
start?
Yeah, so I went from the most corporate corporation in the world, which is Microsoft, into, a startup, which is, I think is probably the most different things you can imagine. Um, it was a lot of fun. It was like I suddenly encountered a lot of freedom, but then, also it introduces a lot of anxiety because it's your own company now and you're responsible for people. And like startup is a survival. It's a battle every day. The odds are stacked against you. Your competitors are stacked against you. The market doesn't want you to succeed. Every large corporation wants to swallow the business that
Hmm.
you're after because they want a bigger piece of the pie. And so there's a lot of, just stress coming in with that. But it's been the best thing I've ever done in my life. And this is what I tell everyone. I will do it again and again and again if I needed to.
Uh, so you mentioned the responsibility of caring for your people a couple of times, and also you used the word stress,
Yeah.
right? Uh, so do you have any practices that help you stay grounded?
Um, yes, it's mostly to do with the things I do outside of work. Even though I like to view like work and personal life as like this one stream of activities, I don't like to divide work life and personal life. I like to just have a life, and this life has like work activities and personal activities. But if you probably can see this box behind me, listeners in the podcast might not be able to, but it's a guitar, and I love playing guitar. This for me is what grounds me. I record music, I play music, I compose it. This is really what keeps me grounded. And many times when I write lyrics or I write a song, it's about like day-to-day things I experience in my startup entrepreneur life. And so this is really what grounds me. Also, talking to my co-founder does help because we are there for each other. So for other, sort of founders who might be listening to this, finding someone to talk to, even on a daily basis, is something that is very important in my view.
Because I'm always curious. I mean, we are going completely, off this topic, but this has been one of my uh, curiosity questions for many years now. Because if you look at the way we've been teaching software and how people kind of learn and start coding and all that, and you compare it to the way we teach or we learn music, right? Uh,
Mhm.
there are some, I mean, very young kids start with music. Now,
Correct.
somehow they follow some school, they're able to appreciate the patterns of the notes and then how to build more complex patterns and how to play with others, teamwork, a lot of things that seem to be very relevant for building high performance software teams or even just
Yeah.
being a high performance individual contributor. So I've always been looking for people who kind of understand both or who kind of been dabbling in both, not to see if there are some cross-domain learnings that we could
Oh
take from
yeah.
music to uh, getting great developers.
For sure. This is really fun to talk about. So definitely, and the one big aspect of this is when you need to solve a software challenge, what you do, like the very first thing you do is you want to break it down to multiple pieces. It's exactly the same way with music. When you want to learn a piece, you can't like learn the whole thing in one go. You need to basically divide it as like the intro, the verse, the chorus, the bridge, and even inside of one of those, you're going to be tackling each individual part, and you'll probably sometimes you'll want to tackle the hard parts and then learn the easy ones, or you'll want to gain confidence and start with the easy ones and then tackle the hard parts. And it's exactly the same thing with software, where sometimes you really to gain confidence in your ability as a programmer, you'll want to tackle the easy things and then just go to the hard things. And this breaking down of problems into small segments and conquering the problem that way in an incremental manner, I think is very common between music and software engineering.
Hmm. Yeah, and also when you listen to music, if somebody has gone in an orchestra off scale, you can
Mhm.
immediately notice it, right?
Yeah,
Whereas
for
when a
sure.
team is writing code, uh, I always wonder whether there's an easy way of figuring out that no, this has to be fixed, or no, there is something even as things come together.
Yeah, I wish that in software people would discover bugs fast as, musicians can identify a note that's out of scale.
Yeah,
But yeah, I agree.
yeah. Uh, so it's been wonderful, talking to you. I think we covered a lot of things, but I would
Mhm.
like to ask you some tips for people who want to be part of the open source community. I mean, how could someone get in, or what is it that they could gain, whether they are entry level professionals or seasoned professionals?
Yeah, so I think ultimate advice for people is talk to the maintainers and ask for help. Most open source projects, if they're well run, and in the CNCF, all projects have that, is something called a contributor guide. This would probably be the first place you're going to look at. How to become a contributor and how to start contributing. And you can basically talk to the maintainers and open issues. And I really recommend that people, before they submit a code change, that they open an issue to get the blessing of maintainers to know that this is something that they can actually work on, and that's going to get accepted so people don't waste their time. But my one big advice is just talk to the people involved with the project and see where they need help the most.
Now, with a lot of talk about AI taking away software jobs,
Mhm.
uh, what is your take on that?
Yeah, I think it's not great. I think AI software in general should live to work with people instead of replacing people wholesale. So I'm like personally am not very happy with the fact that people are losing jobs to AI. Yes, not much we can do about it. Technology has its own break pace need to basically drive forward and break through barriers. Yeah, and I feel like we're jumping ahead a little bit without making sure that we're ready for the ethical consideration of what AI brings with it.
But how do you see the future of somebody who wants to get into software now?
I still recommend for people to get into software for sure. But I would recommend, learning AI first languages, learning AI engineering, really. And I'm not talking about prompt engineering. I'm basically talking about being able to understand how to write AI-based systems and infrastructure for AI-based systems. And getting involved with open source projects that are in the AI space is a really good first step. So if we're tying that back into open source, I think that's how people can get into AI engineering very quickly.
Okay. Yeah, I think on that positive note, thanks a lot, Yaron, for sharing your perspective. It's been really amazing. When I just reflected back, I think we covered a lot of ground in the last probably 30, 40 minutes. Yeah.
Yeah.
Thanks a lot for staying up late and sharing your perspectives and your story.
Okay. Thank you so much for having me.
Thanks.
Thank you.
We thank Siddharth for the music and Anita for promoting the Software People stories.
If you like this episode,
Please subscribe on your favorite podcast client.
And spread the word in your network.
if you'd like to share your story,
Contact us at podcasts@pm-powerconsulting.com.